Freud's library had more books on anthropology and archaeology than on psychology. And in place of visiting other cultures, Freud surrounded himself with ancient Greek, Roman, and Egyptian antiquities. In Totem and Taboo, Freud, without the benefit of genetic theory, employed psycholamarchianism to posit the notion of a collective mind as a repository of cultural memories inherited from one generation to the next. The term collective mind was Freud's term. It was Freud's way to come to terms with universal symbolism and the recurring nature of the Oedipus and castration complexes. Totem and Taboo was and continues to be compelling, even though it was recognized as incorrect from the time of its publication, the Psycholamarchism. It never gained widespread acceptance, but Freud felt it was the best answer available at that time to address the phenomena about which he was concerned. Carl Jung was also interested in these matters, but unlike Freud, he got out of his office in 1925 and visited the Pueblo Indians in New Mexico and went on expedition through Kenya, Egypt, and Uganda, visiting the Maasai, the Elgonyi, and other Aboriginal peoples of Africa. Hesa Roheim, a Hungarian psychoanalyst, undertook field studies among the Aboriginal peoples of Central Australia, on Normanby Island and among the Yuma. Roheim concluded that the universality of the complexes was not due to a collective mind, as Freud had asserted, but to the reoccurring nature of typical traumas and the child-rearing practices which inevitably lead to them. So while Freud is talking about the phylogenetic origin of these symbols and complexes, Roheim is saying, no, it's based on ontogenetic factors. In 1937, Erik Erikson visited the Oglala Sioux, and in the early 1940s, the Yurok Native Americans of Northern California. He was a good friend of Kroeber's, incidentally, and it was Kroeber that introduced him to the Yurok in Northern California. Erikson's interest was in their child-rearing strategies and their corresponding traditional worldviews. That is, he was interested in the dialectic of childhood and society. To investigate these, to these investigators, we could also add L. Bryce Boyer's work with the Apache, Robert Stoller's work among the Aboriginal peoples of New Guinea, and a few others. This is the fascinating, yet not well-traveled psychoanalytic tradition into which Drs. Beth Kalish-Weiss and Charles Fisher are currently exploring in their work with the Ecuadorian Achuar. Incidentally, this is a picture of a Yurok man that Erik Erikson had taken probably back in 1939. And Beth Kalish-Weiss and Charles Fisher, this is some work they're doing currently. They're studying the dream interpretation techniques of the Achuar. The Achuar indigenous people in Ecuador wake up in the morning, come together, tell their dreams, and sort of have like a kind of a group interpretation. And they've gone down several times and had some very interesting experiences down there. For my part, I have been studying libido development and cultural evolution as a way of revisiting Totem and Taboo, armed with a century of additional research from the fields involved. In brief, these are photographs I've taken, that little boy before and this one here. In brief, I have learned that the psychosexual stages of individual development find chronological expression in the early stages of human prehistory. I discovered oral dynamics in the Upper Paleolithic, anal dynamics in the Neolithic, phallic Oedipal dynamics in the Upper Neolithic, and adolescent genital dynamics in the Urban Revolution. Addressing only the first two stages, I found that in the Upper Paleolithic cultures, people were nomadic. Their lives was ordered around obtaining food and being at the mercy of Mother Earth, who either provided bountifully or let her children starve. They were the first hominids to create representational art, including numerous mother figurines. The Upper Paleolithic peoples invented the concept of the spirit and the rituals of cannibalism, skull and amulet worship, and the funeral. As nomadic peoples, they lived in a kind of unity with nature, just as the infant lives in a kind of unity with its mother. This is a Oti mother, again, up the Orinoco. And this is the house, a typical house of the Oti that I visited in 2009. But in the Neolithic people, with the Neolithic people, there was the establishment of permanent houses, and they invented animal husbandry and agriculture. The mother figurines continued to dominate. You see all these little mother figurines of the Paleolithic. They continued to dominate in the Neolithic, but they were typically representations in ceramic. And while in the Neolithic they were creating these little mother figurines, they were at the same time, by getting involved in agriculture and animal husbandry, they were also taking control over nature, unlike the lives of the Paleolithic, where they were largely at the mercy of nature, gaining, their technology. But in the Neolithic, wow, now they are deciding which plants to grow, how to grow them, how to harvest them, how to raise the animals, to establish homes, permanent homes, and not have to be wandering after whatever else might be available to eat. In the Neolithic introduced the circle that separated the world into an inside and an outside. In the Neolithic, we invented the wall around the perimeter of the village, the walls of the house, the walls of the hearth, and the walls of the ceramic pot. The control that comes with a definition of an inside and an outside is akin to the anal control the toddler establishes in managing the sphincters and ego boundaries, his circle of influence. A culture is not an individual, but rather a group of individuals, each of whom goes through his or her own development. But as members of a culture, those stages of development, corresponding traumas find expression in cultural form, which then become the ground and surround upon which the next generation emerges. Individual development and cultural evolution do not play ping-pong, each influencing the other in turn. No, the individual and culture are together in a field of mutual formation. This is a very brief description of some of the insights I derived as an armchair anthropologist, but when I ventured up the Orinoco, I went not to confirm these insights, but simply to see what I might find and discover how it might change or elaborate my thinking. The peoples I visited had some modern clothes, machetes, flashlights, plastic cups, metal pots, and some even had electric generators. But to a great extent, they lived the lives of semi-nomadic Neolithic peoples, embedded in nature, hunting, fishing, and working their gardens the way their ancestors had for millennia. More than anything else, I was impressed by the interpenetration of their inner and outer worlds. This is the Hoti village that I visited at, where we see some of these images. And this later found a distinct echo in the work of Drs. Beth Kalish-Weiss and Charles Fisher among the Ecuadorian Achuar and their tradition of dream interpretation, wherein external and internal realities meet in the social community of the social circle of community life. Their tradition recognizes the way in which dream and waking realities have intercolonized, and the way the past, present, and future have also found a space in which to coexist. In the fact that we separate our dreams from our waking realities with alarm clocks, showers, the radio, clothes, breakfast, cups of coffee, and a commute in traffic does not mean we do not keep dreaming or have primary process thinking going on unconsciously throughout the day. Our cultural evolution has created a wall between primary and secondary process and relegated dream life in modern times to a dark back room where spirits are ignored until they bite us hard in the form of nightmares or psychological symptoms. I once met a Spanish-speaking Yanomami shaman and asked him if his people paid attention to their dreams. He told me that if a shaman has a dream of another shaman, it means he, the dreamer, is in danger of dying. He said he dreamt of another shaman on 2 occasions, and that his brother, also a shaman, performed rituals in order to save his life. He clearly felt very grateful to his brother. It is a simple anecdote that reveals to us the view that the dream reality and waking reality interpenetrate, and that a deadly threat from one side can easily penetrate to the other. Apparently, within some cultural contexts, dreams and waking reality are interpreted in different ratios of literal and figurative interpretation. The Oti live in homes embedded in nature and built out of nature. Their canoes are dug out of a single trunk. Their loincloths are made out of hand-spun cotton. In the Oti village, people and animals live in the same space: dogs, pigs, and birds. I once saw a woman chew some cooked manioc and extrude it between her lips and directly into the mouth of the baby toucan she was holding in her, actually, the toucan I'm holding in my hand in that picture. One sees monkey skulls in the rafters, the skull of a bush pig here, a tapir skull there. These skulls propitiate the animal spirits and maintain the productivity of the hunt. The coexistence of people, animals, and human projections in the form of spirits help us to see how we have become so different, and yet not so different, from our Aboriginal cousins and ancestors. Our modern worldview is largely shaped by the technology of walls that separate the insides of our homes from the wilderness outside and the spirits that live there. Our clothes protect us from the mischievous spirit of Eros. Our lights control the darkness and the monsters hiding under our beds. Our germ theory and common hygiene banish evil gremlins to the sewers. Our principles of cause and effect and powers of reasoning exile the magic demons to the outskirts of experience. Our scientific method siphons off the alchemist's projections and allow us to approach, even if only asymptotically, the object and the other out there. Civilization and modern psychological structure are but thin veneers, or better yet, a diaphanous veil over the exceedingly human nature of our spirit world. After navigating 5 days up the Rio Orinoco and Rio Casiquiare, we arrive at a Yanomami village. The whole region has been experiencing a severe drought during what was supposed to be their usual wet season. The river was low, meaning that boats were in danger of getting caught on sandbars or ripped open on jagged rocks. This naturally threatened to isolate villages from one another and make it difficult to get to fishing spots. We arrive, step off the boat, and we are taken to the village where we find a large central community space surrounded by 20 rectangular houses. We walk to the shaman's meeting space, a rectangular traditional structure with no walls, a thatch roof, and a dirt floor. The 6 shamans only wear light shorts. Their faces and bodies are painted with reddish-brown body paint in lines and arcs and circles. Some wear feather earrings, bead necklaces, or shamanic arm bracelets with feathers. The men sit on their haunches or on little stools. Each shaman chews a wad of tobacco. On the ground is a piece of metal and a piece of plastic bag with the hallucinogenic light greenish-brown jopo powder, made from specially prepared seeds. There's a simple wooden tube about 3 feet long that narrows at one end and has a ring of bitumen about half an inch from the end. One places this end in the nose when snorting the jopo. It has a distinctively phallic shape. There is also a large Stone Age axe. Ancient Stone Age tools are often found while tending their gardens. They are seen as gifts from their ancestors and take a special place in the ceremony. After being introduced to the shamans, I remove my hat and shirt and sit down with them. There isn't much talking at this point, but there is an easygoing feeling of just being together. One after another, the shamans insufflate the jopo. The jopo is placed in one end of the tube, and the shaman blows the jopo through the tube and into the nostril of the other shaman. They gag, grab or hit the backs of their heads, and scratch their scalp. It has that kind of effect. The jopo has the effect of causing this strange pain and itching in the head and scalp. They hack and snot and spit on the dirt floor. As they all get fairly loaded up on jopo, there is constantly someone or another spitting, snotting, clearing their nasal passages, or hacking. The men start chanting and dancing. The dance is just a slight jump from one foot to the other, with arms bent, elbows slightly raised, and hands raised. The Aboriginal people of the Upper Orinoco make little distinction between the animals of the jungles and themselves. Under the influence of jopo, this distinction seems to disappear as the shamans get in contact with their hekuras, their personal animal spirits. The animal spirit guides the shaman in his efforts to direct the spiritual life of the community and to heal the sick. As the ceremony continues, the shamans are hacking, spitting, snotting, and drooling. Many have long green strings of mucus oozing out of their nostrils, down across their lips, and hanging there 2 or 3 or 4 inches below their chins. They leave the snot hanging off their faces for inordinate amounts of time and only occasionally clear it with their fingers or the stem of a palm leaf. Large masses of snot and spittle are accumulating on the floor where they dance barefoot. It's not half as disgusting as it sounds. In fact, I find it creates a distinctly intimate feeling within the group. As they dance, they chant several words and repeat them over and over, then change the words and repeat those. I don't know what is being said, but it does not have the sound of a prescribed text, like a formal prayer, but rather a phrase that comes to them as an inspiration. As the shamans dance and chant, one at a time the ceremony is building, and the chanting becomes screaming and growling, and the dancers take on dramatic facial expressions and gesticulations. Sometimes a dancing shaman says something, and another sitting shaman answers back respectively, and the two go back and forth like this for a time and maybe start laughing together. This happens repeatedly between the chief, Enrique, and what I would call the lead shaman, Delphine. Enrique follows Delphine in his dancing, chanting, and answering him responsively. It is a hot but glorious day of blue skies, flooding equatorial sunlight, and a few billowing white clouds. As the ceremony goes on, the community go on about their business. Bare-breasted women carry buckets of water on their head. Naked little girls and boys carry younger siblings on their hips. Teenagers walk by eating a sweet fruit that grows wild in the jungle. A woman carries a basket of wood for cooking. The spirit of the ceremony is building, and soon Delphine is quite clearly talking and arguing with some spirit. A large black bird flies into the shamanic space. A shaman hits at it to get it out, but it keeps flying back in. The interpenetration of people, plants, and animals is profound. Delphine, in contact with his hekura, lifts his shoulder close to his ears, then raises his elbows to shoulder level, then bends his arms at the elbows, raises his forearms, and turns in his fists. He bends his legs so that he is bow-legged and leans to one side. He turns his head and begins to squawk and scream like some sort of a mad bird. He is at other times a mild-mannered and rather timid shaman, and even now he rarely seems to make eye contact with anyone. But he is in contact with his hekura, his animal spirit, and begins to embody it and be embodied by it. He clucks and squawks and screams. He struts and jumps. He is fascinating to watch, and there's an extraordinary humor in it all. He is a brilliant actor, but there appears to be no acting intention. He is being acted upon by his hekura. Suddenly, I hear another shaman squawking. I turn around and see no one. I look down and find a large green parrot right behind me. The squawking parrot is actually a bird mimicking the man squawking like a bird. Delphine is now arguing with some spirit, and the next thing I know, he grabs the bow of his bow and arrow, unstrings it, and uses it as a spear to attack a monster. He is roaring, screaming, and fighting the beast. He takes his bow and thrusts it deep into the ground's dry, packed earth. He uses such strength, it penetrates the ground several inches, and now stands by itself. Delphine then falls to the ground next to the spear and acts out the part of the impaled and wounded beast. It's absolutely overwhelming. Soon Enrique joins in on the dance and the battle, using the jopo tube as a spear to stab at the air. Then Enrique and Delphine jump out of the shamanic space and into the much larger community circle. They run here and there, attacking the unseen forces. Another shaman, blasted into the spirit world, picks up a huge axe and joins them in their assault on the spirits. The three of them are running around here and there, battling the forces. They run this way and that and seem to be having a childlike kind of fun, but there is also the feeling that they are being deadly serious about all this. The battle goes on. Then suddenly they stop and look intently in the direction of the river. They look and point. I can't tell what it is they're seeing, if anything at all, as my view is blocked within the shamanic space. The three of them are running here and there, and children in the community space are running scared. The shamanic battle is intensifying, and suddenly there's a huge gust of wind. I mean, huge. Leaves start flying all around. People start running for cover. And the three shamans carry on the battle as a storm of thunder and lightning descends upon us at close range in a matter of seconds. The rain pours down in torrents, soaking the three shamans, who continue stabbing the air with their unstrung bow and jopo tube and swinging the giant axe. The rest of us watch from under the thatch roof. The rain is pouring down, and Delphine returns to the shaman's space. He leans back against a pole, grabs his genitals through his shorts, and shakes them vigorously, screaming, "Pishi! Pishi!" It seems like some sort of sympathetic magic gesture, uniting peeing with raining, and encouraging the rain to keep pouring. Everyone is howling with laughter, and the whole thing is absolutely spectacular. Soon the rain lets up, and the ceremony comes to a peaceful end. The line between the ceremony and the storm has dissolved completely. Did the shaman's ceremony bring the rainstorm? Or did the rainstorm bring the shaman's ceremony? Or was the shaman's ceremony and the rainstorm somehow part of a whole? If contemporary Neolithic peoples live in a world in which the interpenetration of inner and outer realities takes place through gaping holes in the separating wall between the community and the jungle, the hallucinogenic Joko ceremony knocks the wall down, turning the dream into an external reality and the external reality into a dream. Psychoanalysis, on the other hand, leaves the wall in place, but opens a window on the dream world in the midst of waking reality. Through the window, we see how the totemic spirits are projected onto the analyst in the form of a transference, and how dream logic is embedded in symptoms and the repetition compulsion. Direct contact with the dream spirits and verbal elaboration alone often has a curative effect, but when interpretation leads to reconstruction and narrative elaboration, the patient has a chance to develop a better relationship to his hekura, his spirits, his internal objects. If the oral stage finds expression in the Upper Paleolithic in a kind of oneness or lack of differentiation from nature, then the Neolithic impresses us with the way it technologically separated us from nature, with village borders, house walls, oven perimeters, and the walls of the ceramic pot. As dough transformed into bread in the Neolithic oven and juice into wine in the gourd, culture transformed in the village, the family, and the family transformed in the house, the individual human mind transformed within the vessel of culture itself. The separation of people from nature facilitated a separation of inside from outside, dreams from waking reality, secondary process from primary process thinking, and gave rise to technological control over nature without and the psychological dominance of ego consciousness over unconsciousness. Yes, the rudimentary separation was in place long before the Neolithic, but in the Neolithic the separation became technologically established, with dramatic consequences for ongoing cultural evolution. Our spiritual saturation in nature was a cultural parallel to narcissism, and our newly developing technologies provided us with defensive structures against the threats of the wilderness. Thus, within the vessel of culture, there developed a set of traditions that gave rise to our modern psychological structures. The cosmic space of here became located at the center of the universe, expanded out into three-dimensional space, and the eternal now of cosmic time stretched out into circular time and later still linear time with the urban revolution and its invention of the calendar. Freud did not have the last century of science and scholarship to tease out the various strands of his prehistoric reconstruction of the human psyche, but he had an intellect and an intuition that told him where to look. In child development, in psychopathology, in mythology, in the history of religion, in evolutionary theory, in cultural evolution, and particularly in prehistory. Freud's unified theory of individual development and cultural evolution in Totem and Taboo is the jewel of his genius, even if his conclusions were incorrect. The cultural innovations of the Paleolithic, Neolithic, Upper Neolithic, and Urban Revolution, and the psychological structures they support, are not retained as species-specific memories in a collective mind, passed on from one generation to the next via psycho-Lamarckian inheritance. No, they are carried in and inherited through language, technology, customs, ideas, and other cultural artifacts passed on from generation to generation through the medium of culture itself.